Pleasure to welcome Adam Rizzieri to the cbushomeimprovement.com live line. Adam is Chief Marketing Officer at Agency Partner Interactive. If you would, Adam, give me the quick thumbnail. What's going on at Agency Partner Interactive?
We are just helping businesses grow and thrive despite this crazy, crazy year that 2020 has been. We help businesses create amazing online experiences through great business websites and mobile experiences, and then we help make sure they get the right traffic to those sites using digital marketing to just really help them ideally double to triple their revenue within 16 to 18 months.
Very cool. Very cool. So why weigh in on what's going on in Twitter and Facebook? I mean, the big story, it seems, of late with those two entities is what seems to be the censorship of the Hunter/Joe Biden story pertaining to Ukraine and China and Burisma. If you were advising them, I'm talking Twitter and Facebook, not the Bidens, what would you have told them to do, and would it be different than what they're currently doing?
Yeah, if I were advising them, I would say that if you guys want to continue to enjoy the Section 230 immunities granted by the FCC, then stay hands off of this one. Do not try and censor a publication that was founded in 1801 by Alexander Hamilton, one of the oldest publications in our country. Stay back. If you want to get into the game of censorship, then you're talking about picking sides. And when you're picking sides and you're really defining and kind of driving the narrative of a nation during an election, then all of a sudden you're kind of entering a very different world when it comes to having an online platform that's designed for information sharing.
So, I mean, is that the kind of thing that you think most users of Facebook and Twitter are even aware of?
Definitely not. Definitely not. Now, people are becoming more and more aware of it just because of the backlash that I think Twitter and Facebook are suffering from making that decision to just block this article from circulating on the web. Obviously, a lot of the more right of center news outlets have made this a story worth talking about. But the reality is it's a bipartisan issue at this point. The issue of whether these social media platforms should be censoring messages and should be blocking certain types of discussions and content from the general public. You know, we've seen both Facebook and Twitter block not only the president's accounts, but also the accounts of individual users, and of course now these larger media organizations that are typically the ones that you go to when you're trying to seek facts and when you're trying to validate and authenticate stories. So we're really in this new sort of world where people are increasingly more aware of really the implicit media bias that exists at the social media platforms. They use AI for the most part to monitor conversations that are sensitive in nature, but then you also have a human element in there where you're seeing inconsistent blocking of certain types of content. And of course, when that leads up to an election, that could be very dangerous, especially when certain states are decided by just small percentages of a difference, you know? So I think people are more aware of what's going on, and frankly, it's great to see the conversation taking place at the Senate. Bipartisan support, like I said, as to whether or not social platforms should be responsible for the content that's being published. On the left, you have people saying, hey, you know what? Hate speech is a thing that circulates on social media. That's not okay. Twitter, Facebook, it's your job to block that. And then on the right, you have the argument that, you know what, you guys are blocking conservative viewpoints and conservative stories that matter. That's not okay. So you're finding different reasons and different fuel to the fire from the left and the right. But at the end of the day, the message is this. Social media platforms, you need to be more consistent about what you allow and what you don't allow.
Adam Rizzieri, our guest, Chief Marketing Officer at Agency Partner Interactive. So when you talk about that, Adam, there's all kinds of stories about Chinese and Russian bots that, put disinformation out to try to get people riled up. And it's pretty effective when it gets through. You've got like QAnon, you've got Antifa, and those kinds of things. So how does blocking that type of content differ from what's going on with the story about the Bidens?
Great question, and really it's the credibility behind the outlet. So when you have content circulating from QAnon and Antifa specifically, a lot of times those accounts, those handles, the sources of that information, if you look at their history, I mean, you can tell pretty quickly sort of what they're all about. Whereas if you look at a publication like the New York Post and what they're publishing on Twitter, obviously you're going to see a huge history of different types of content and different types of coverage. There's really no comparison when you try to look at an outlet like the Post and a random Twitter account that looks like a really angry internet troll that actually turns out to be an Antifa account. So it's pretty easy to sort of see what that difference is. And so I hope to see some really strong moves towards making more consistent and just more transparent actions to really dictate what's okay to block and what's not. So,
I mean, given the fact that we're 2 weeks away from the election, I know the Judge Amy Coney Barrett thing, Senate's working on that, trying to get her pushed through before Election Day. But it seems like most of D.C. right now is just focused on the election. So, I mean, do you think this story gets any traction? And again, I don't mean the Biden story. I mean the story of basically Facebook and Twitter censoring the story from getting out to the general population.
Yeah, so, I think you're going to hear some stuff about it this week, leading up to Justice Barrett's confirmation this week. I expect that to be Thursday. Leading up to the election between now and then, there will be a discussion next week before Senate with both Jack Dorsey and Zuckerberg. And obviously Zuckerberg, this guy's had to wear a suit more often the last few years than he has his whole life with his trips to the legislature. So in terms of, are we going to be talking about this after the election? I hope so. But it really depends on who's elected. I think there's a lot more fuel to the fire coming from the conservatives in the Senate. And really, if we see, well, I hate to say it, but if we see Biden get elected, he's a little bit more buddy-buddy with these big tech firms. And I would say that change is less likely to occur if we see more of a wave from the left kind of take power. And that's just the reality, because ultimately the concern is really an issue of free speech, I think, in a lot of cases. And so when it comes to constitutional conservatives, they're going to be ones that are more likely to see a move towards ensuring that free speech propagates through these social media platforms.
Yeah, but it's got to be so tough to draw that line, because, free speech, it should go for the Antifa or the QAnon person as much as anybody. I mean, we've picked and choose where we want to draw the line, and people are like, well, hate speech is bad, but bad coverage of a story, bad coverage of a person that you like, shouldn't there be free speech for both?
Of course. Well, yes and no, right? So, but the question is where is that line, and what is permissible and what's not? I'm definitely one to say that hate speech is not okay, but I'm also one to say that people should be responsible for their own actions and for their voices, right? So, at the end of the day, the Section 230 part of the FCC Communications Decency Act basically says, what, social media platforms, if this guy out here wants to spew hate speech, your platforms are immune to it. And so this shift is going to basically kind of come saying that, okay, social media platforms, in the future with Section 230, if we change this, you're now responsible for what you choose to allow and for what you don't choose to allow.
Yeah.
And so right now, social media platforms are just kind of going, I guess it's like the Wild West in terms of what they block and what they don't block. There's just no consistency there. So, in terms of promoting free speech, if we're looking at these social media platforms as these free speech outlets, well, the reality is whether right or wrong, they're stifling speech. And really, they're doing it autonomously. It's their own decisions to do so. So when it comes down to an election, we're wondering what is the line, and what is the transparency? How are you choosing to block certain types of content, and how are you choosing to allow certain types of content?
Yeah, well, it's going to be interesting to see what it does as far as how many people use those platforms and pay attention to them, no doubt. Adam, thanks for the visit and the time this morning. Adam Rizzieri, Chief Marketing Officer at Agency Partner Interactive.